The moon cast long, silver fingers across Oak Ridge Valley, painting the Montana wilderness in shades of blue and black. The year was 1879, and time seemed to move differently here, measured by seasons rather than hours, by the growth of crops rather than the ticking of clocks. Through this silver-drenched landscape, a figure moved with desperate purpose. A woman, her long black hair streaming behind her, ran between shadowed pines and across moonlit clearings. Her buckskin dress was torn at the shoulder, dark stains spreading across the fabric. Blood, still fresh. She was Apache, with features sharpened by exhaustion and eyes that darted continuously behind her. Her name was Singing Bird, though most who knew her simply called her Bird, and tonight she was running for her life. The thunder of hooves broke the night's stillness. Voices called through the trees, angry and determined. A gunshot cracked the air, splintering bark inches from her head. There, I see her. Bird ducked lower, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her side burned where a bullet had grazed her earlier. She'd been running for nearly 2 days, stopping only when exhaustion threatened to collapse her. Ahead, moonlight glinted off water, a creek cutting through the valley. Bird pushed herself harder, reaching the water's edge and plunging in without hesitation. The cold shocked her system, nearly stealing her breath, but she forced herself forward, using the current to carry her downstream away from her pursuers. When she finally dragged herself onto the opposite bank, her limbs trembled with fatigue. The voices seemed more distant now, confused by her trail disappearing at the water's edge. Bird pulled herself upright, staggering forward on legs that threatened to buckle beneath her. Through the trees, she spotted a faint orange glow, a window perhaps of some settler's home. She hesitated. White men's dwellings meant danger as often as sanctuary, but her options were dwindling with her strength. 10 more steps. 5 more. The world began to spin around her. The last thing Bird saw before darkness claimed her was the silhouette of a small barn against the night sky, and then nothing but the cold embrace of unconsciousness. Pa, come quick! There's a lady sleeping by the creek." The voice, high and insistent, pierced through the darkness. Bird's eyelids fluttered, then opened to find a young girl's face inches from her own, blue eyes wide with curiosity beneath a tangle of blonde curls. Bird tried to move and gasped as pain lanced through her side. The girl jumped back, startled but not afraid. "You're hurt," the child said, kneeling down again. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old. "I'll get Pa, he can fix you." Before Bird could respond, the girl was gone, running toward a modest farmhouse set back from the creek. Bird pushed herself up on one elbow, assessing her surroundings. Dawn was breaking over the eastern hills, painting the valley in soft gold. She was at the edge of a small homestead, a weathered 2-story house, a barn, a corral with a few horses, fields of what looked like wheat stretching toward the foothills, a place that could offer shelter or betray her to the men who hunted her. The front door of the house opened, and the girl returned with a man following close behind. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair showing threads of silver at the temples. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines etched deeply around eyes that had seen too much. He carried a rifle in one hand, but it hung loosely at his side rather than pointed at her. "Sarah, stay back," he said to the girl, his voice low and even. He approached Bird cautiously, studying her with eyes the color of stormy skies. "You're on my land." Bird tried to stand to show she meant no threat, but pain and weakness betrayed her. She fell back, her hand pressed to her bleeding side. "Apache," the man noted, seeing her dress and features clearly in the growing light. His expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. "You running from something?" Bird nodded once, deciding limited truth was safer than lies. "Men, with guns." Her English came out stilted, deliberately so. Better he think her understanding limited. "Bounty hunters came through town yesterday," the man said, more to himself than to her. He stood silent for a long moment, decision weighing visibly on his shoulders. Finally he sighed, lowering his rifle completely. "Can you walk, or do I need to carry you?" Bird stared at him, surprised by the offer. "Walk," she said, pushing herself upright despite the pain. Pride would not let her appear completely helpless. "Pa, she's bleeding," Sarah said, pointing to the darkening stain on Bird's side. The man nodded. "I see it, Sarah." To Bird he added, "I'm Samuel McAllister. This is my daughter, Sarah. My other daughter, Victoria, is in the house." A pause. You got a name? Bird hesitated, then touched her throat. Singing Bird, she said softly. Singing Bird, Sarah repeated, smiling. That's pretty. Sam, as he was known to most, didn't smile, but some of the wariness left his eyes. Come on, then. I'll have a look at that wound. After that, you'll be on your way. Bird nodded, understanding the terms. One night's shelter was more than she'd hoped for. The walk to the house was slow, Bird's strength failing with each step. By the time they reached the porch, Sam had to steady her with a hand at her elbow. Sarah ran ahead, pushing the door open and announcing their visitor with childish excitement. Victoria! Pa's bringing a lady with a pretty name. A teenage girl appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical braid, her expression shifting from curiosity to alarm. Pa, what are you doing? Victoria's voice was sharp with concern. At 15, she carried herself with the serious air of someone forced to grow up too quickly. Her eyes, the same stormy gray as her father's, assessed Bird with immediate suspicion. She's Apache. She's hurt, Sam replied simply, guiding Bird inside. And probably in trouble, Victoria persisted. The sheriff was talking about— I know what the sheriff was talking about, Sam cut her off, his tone ending further discussion. She needs medical attention. After that, she's moving on. Victoria pressed her lips together, clearly unhappy with the decision, but unwilling to challenge her father directly. She stepped aside, allowing them to enter, but keeping a wary distance. The interior of the McAllister home was modest, but well kept. A wooden table with 4 chairs dominated the main room, with a stone fireplace against one wall. Simple curtains framed the windows, and a patchwork quilt hung over the back of a rocking chair. Touches of femininity in a house otherwise defined by practicality. Sam guided Bird to a chair by the fireplace. Victoria, get my medical box from the shelf. Sarah, fetch clean water and cloths. The girls moved to follow his instructions, Victoria with reluctant efficiency, Sarah with eager helpfulness. Just one night, Sam told Bird, his voice low enough that the girls couldn't hear. I can't risk more than that with my daughters. Bird nodded, understanding completely. Thank you, she whispered, the words coming out more genuinely than she'd intended. Sam's eyes met hers and something passed between them. A moment of recognition, perhaps, between two people carrying invisible burdens. Then his expression closed again, and he turned to take the medical box from Victoria. Let's see what we're dealing with, he said, all business now. Bird reluctantly pulled aside the torn fabric of her dress, revealing the bullet graze along her ribs. The wound wasn't deep, but it was angry and red, with dirt embedded in the torn flesh. Sam worked methodically, cleaning the injury with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. His hands were calloused but sure, testament to years of work on the land and, Bird suspected, other skills beyond farming. As he tended to her wounds, Sam's fingers brushed against older scars on her back, long, pale marks that told stories of previous suffering. His hands paused momentarily, his eyes lifting to meet hers in silent recognition of what those scars meant. War leaves many wounds, he said quietly, not all of them visible. Bird held his gaze and nodded once. It was the most honest exchange they had had, and it happened without words. After bandaging her side, Sam moved away, maintaining a respectful distance. You need food and rest. Victoria will show you where you can sleep tonight. Victoria looked ready to protest, but held her tongue at her father's firm glance. This way, she said stiffly, gesturing toward a small alcove off the main room that contained a simple cot. Thank you, Bird said, inclining her head slightly to Sam. He nodded once, then turned to stoke the fire. Tomorrow you'll need to move on, for all our sakes. Bird understood. This man was protecting his family, just as she was protecting herself. One night was all she could ask for, a brief respite in a journey that had no clear destination except away from those who hunted her. Samuel McAllister sat on the porch long after his daughters had gone to bed. The Apache woman, a singing bird, was sleeping on the cot inside, her breathing finally evening out into the rhythm of true rest. Sam stared at the night sky, at stars scattered like salt across black velvet. 3 years ago, Elizabeth would have sat beside him on nights like this, her head on his shoulder as they talked about the day's events, or simply enjoyed the quiet together. But Elizabeth was gone, taken by fever after Sarah's birth. The doctor had arrived too late, despite Sam riding half the night to fetch him. He'd buried her on the hill behind the barn, beneath an old oak tree she'd loved, and something inside him had been buried with her. In the years since, Sam had retreated from the world, focused only on running his farm and raising his girls. He rarely went to town anymore, avoided church gatherings, declined invitations from neighbors. The people of Oak Ridge had taken to calling him the Shadow, a man who moved through life without fully participating in it. Sam knew they were right. He'd been living as a ghost, going through the motions of existence without truly being alive. The only light in his days came from his daughters, Victoria, so serious and responsible beyond her years, and Sarah, whose innocent joy sometimes broke through the wall he'd built around his grief. And now this Apache woman had stumbled onto his land, bringing danger and complications he didn't need. The smart thing would be to send her on her way at first light, to protect his family from whatever trouble pursued her, yet something about her eyes haunted him. The way they held both fierce determination and profound weariness, as if she'd been fighting too long against too many enemies. He recognized that look. He saw it in his own reflection each morning. The sound of footsteps pulled Sam from his thoughts. Reverend Jonathan Hayes approached along the path from the main road, his tall figure distinctive even in the dim moonlight. At 65, the minister moved with the careful deliberation of age, but his mind remained sharp as ever. "Evening, Samuel," Hayes called softly as he reached the yard. "Thought I might find you still awake." Sam nodded in greeting. Hayes was one of the few people from town who still made the effort to visit, despite Sam's clear preference for solitude. The older man had been a friend to Elizabeth, and he'd conducted her funeral service with genuine sorrow. "Bit late for pastoral visits," Sam observed, but he moved aside on the bench, making room for Hayes to sit. The minister settled beside him with a sigh. "Thought you should know there's trouble brewing. Group of bounty hunters rode into town this afternoon, led by a man named Ethan Wolfe. They're looking for an Apache woman, said she murdered a prominent businessman up north." Sam kept his expression neutral. "Lot of Apache in these parts." "Not so many these days," Hayes countered, "and fewer still who'd be traveling alone." His sharp eyes studied Sam's face. "Word is your Sarah was seen talking about a lady by the creek when Maggie Turner dropped off eggs this morning." Sam frowned. He hadn't known Sarah had spoken to Maggie. "Children talk nonsense." "They do," Hayes agreed mildly, "but these men seem quite determined. The reward they're offering would tempt many in town." "What businessman was supposedly murdered?" Sam asked, his tone carefully casual. "Man named Robert Maxwell, head of Western Rail. According to Wolfe, this Apache woman worked for Maxwell's household, then killed him in his sleep and stole valuable documents." Hayes paused. "Though I find myself wondering how much truth there is to that story." Sam raised an eyebrow. "You questioning the official account, Reverend? That's not like you." Hayes smiled faintly. "I've lived long enough to know that men with money and power often write history to suit themselves, and I've never known an Apache to kill without reason." He stood, straightening his jacket. "Whatever the truth, Samuel, harboring a fugitive is dangerous business, especially with your girls to consider." "I appreciate the warning," Sam said, neither confirming nor denying anything. Hayes nodded, understanding the unspoken message. "I should get back before it's fully dark. Martha worries." He paused at the edge of the porch. The Good Samaritan didn't ask the wounded traveler if he was a criminal before offering aid. He simply saw a fellow human in need. With those parting words, the Reverend made his way back down the path, soon disappearing into the gathering darkness. Sam remained on the porch long after Hayes had gone, turning over the minister's information in his mind. If the woman inside was indeed being pursued by bounty hunters working for a railroad magnate, the danger was greater than he'd initially thought. For a moment, Sam considered waking her and telling her to leave immediately. It would be the safest course for his family. But the memory of her exhaustion, the wound in her side, and the old scars on her back stopped him. Whatever her story, sending her out into the night in her condition might be a death sentence. One night, he reminded himself, she could rest, recover her strength, and be gone before most of the valley awoke. With that decision made, Sam finally rose and went inside. The house was quiet, his daughters asleep in their room upstairs. He checked on them briefly, Victoria with her braid neatly maintained even in sleep, Sarah curled like a small animal under her quilt. Downstairs, he glanced toward the alcove where Singing Bird slept. Her breathing was deep and even, her face relaxed in sleep in a way it hadn't been while she was awake. The firelight cast a warm glow over her features, softening them. For just an instant, the scene reminded Sam of evenings when Elizabeth would fall asleep by the fire, waiting for him to finish evening chores. The memory was so vivid it stole his breath, a physical ache blooming in his chest. Sam turned away abruptly and settled into his own chair, prepared to spend the night keeping watch. If trouble came, he'd be ready. The nightmare came without warning, ripping Bird from sleep with the force of a physical blow. "No, no, please!" The words tore from her throat, a mixture of Apache and English. "Grandfather, run!" In her mind, she was back in the village, smoke filling the air as men on horseback rode through, firing indiscriminately. Her grandfather, the tribal elder, stood in the center of the chaos, his arms raised in a futile gesture of peace. The bullet that struck him seemed to echo forever in her ears. Rough hands grabbed her shoulders, and Bird lashed out, fighting against the attackers from her dream. "Easy," a deep voice commanded. "You're safe. You were dreaming." Reality snapped back into focus. Bird found herself sitting upright on the cot, her hands gripping Samuel McAllister's wrists as he held her shoulders. His gray eyes were alert but calm, studying her with concern rather than fear. "Don't touch me, Maxwell." The words escaped before Bird could stop them. English words, clear and unaccented, nothing like the broken phrases she'd used earlier. Sam's eyes narrowed slightly at the change in her speech, but he released her shoulders and stepped back. "I'm not Maxwell," he said quietly. "You're in my home. You were having a nightmare." Bird's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized her mistake. She'd spoken too clearly, revealed too much. The name she'd uttered, Maxwell, hung in the air between them like an accusation. "You speak English better than you let on," Sam observed, keeping his voice low to avoid waking his daughters. Bird considered lying, then recognized the futility. This man was too observant, too perceptive to fool now. "Yes," she admitted. "I was educated at a mission school before returning to my tribe." Sam studied her for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "Who's Maxwell? The man the bounty hunters say you killed?" Bird stiffened. "You know about that." "Reverend Hayes brought news from town. There's a price on your head." Sam crossed his arms. "Did you kill him?" The directness of the question startled Bird. She met his gaze steadily. "Would you believe me if I said no?" "I might," Sam replied, "but I'd want to know why they're so determined to find you." Bird hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. This man had shown her kindness, but he also had daughters to protect. The less he knew, the safer he would be. "Robert Maxwell was head of Western Rail," she said finally. "His company wanted Apache land for a new railroad line. When my people refused to sell, men came to our village. They killed everyone they could find." Her voice remained steady through years of practice control. "I survived. Later, I found evidence linking Maxwell to the attack." "And you killed him for revenge," Sam concluded. "No," Bird said, surprising herself with the truth. "I wanted to. I planned to. But in the end, I only confronted him, demanded he confess to what he'd done." Her hands clenched in her lap. "Someone else put a bullet in his head while I was there. I ran, and now his men hunt me, claiming I murdered him." Sam's expression remained unreadable. "That's a convenient story." "It's the truth," Bird replied simply. "Believe it or don't. But I didn't kill Robert Maxwell, though many would say he deserved it." Sam was silent for a long moment, weighing her words against some internal measure. "Why tell me this? You could have maintained your pretense, been gone by morning." "Because you recognized my scars for what they are," Bird said quietly. "And because your eyes hold the same shadows I see in my own." She paused. "The less you know, the safer you and your daughters will be. But I won't repay your kindness with unnecessary lies." Something shifted in Sam's expression. Not quite trust, but perhaps a reluctant recognition. "Get some rest," he said finally. "You'll need your strength tomorrow." Bird nodded, settling back onto the cot. "Thank you, Mr. McAllister." "Sam," he corrected. "Just Sam." He returned to his chair by the fire, resuming his vigil. Bird watched him through half-closed eyes, noting the way he positioned himself to monitor both the door and the windows. This was a man accustomed to watching for danger, to protecting what was his. As sleep reclaimed her, Bird wondered what shadows haunted Samuel McAllister and why they seemed so familiar to her own. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee and bacon filling the small house. Bird woke to find Sarah sitting cross-legged on the floor nearby, watching her with undisguised curiosity. "Pa says your name is Singing Bird," the child said when she saw Bird was awake. "Do you sing?" Despite everything, Bird smiled at the simple question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "My mother taught me many songs when I was your age." Sarah's eyes widened with interest. My mama used to sing to me too, but I don't remember it much. She died when I was real little." "Sarah," Victoria's sharp voice came from the kitchen area. "Stop bothering our guest. Breakfast is ready." Sarah bounced to her feet. "You can sit by me," she told Bird earnestly. "I'll show you where." Bird followed the child to the table where Sam was already seated. Victoria stood by the stove, her expression guarded as she served plates of food. The tension in the girl's shoulders was obvious. She didn't want Bird here, and she wasn't bothering to hide it. "Thank you," Bird said to Victoria as the girl reluctantly set a plate before her. Victoria nodded stiffly, but didn't respond. Sam watched the interaction with careful eyes. "Victoria," he said quietly, "Miss Bird will be leaving after breakfast. Until then, she's a guest in our home." Victoria pressed her lips together but nodded. "Yes, Pa." The meal proceeded in awkward silence, broken only by Sarah's occasional questions about Apache life, which Bird answered simply. Sam ate methodically, his attention seemingly on his food but his awareness extending to every movement in the room and beyond. Bird was finishing her coffee when Sam suddenly stiffened, his head turning toward the window. A moment later, Bird heard it too. Hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching. "Victoria, take Sarah upstairs," Sam said, his voice calm but brooking no argument. "Stay there until I call for you." Victoria immediately grabbed her sister's hand. "Come on, Sarah." "But I'm not finished," Sarah protested. "Now, Sarah," Sam said firmly. Something in his tone made the child obey without further complaint. Victoria hurried her up the stairs, casting one worried glance back at her father. Sam moved to the window, peering out cautiously. "4 riders," he reported to Bird, "coming up the main path." Bird's heart pounded. "Bounty hunters?" "Most likely." Sam reached for his rifle, checking it with practiced efficiency. "There's a back door through the kitchen. Woods beyond provide good cover." Bird understood what he was offering, a chance to escape while he delayed the visitors. It was more than most would do for a stranger, especially one bringing trouble to their doorstep. "Thank you," she said, meaning it, "for everything." Sam nodded once, his expression solemn. "Go. Stay low until you reach the tree line." Bird moved toward the kitchen, pausing at the doorway. "Your daughters are fortunate to have a father like you, Sam McAllister." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "We'll see if they still think so after today." Bird slipped through the kitchen to the rear door. She eased it open, scanning the yard beyond. The tree line was about 50 yards away, exposed ground to cross, but manageable if the bounty hunters were occupied at the front of the house. She had just stepped outside when a child's voice called from upstairs, high and distressed. "Pa! Men with guns!" Bird froze. The fear in Sarah's voice triggered something protective in her, something she hadn't felt since losing her tribe. She hesitated, glancing toward the safety of the trees, then back at the house where Sam now stood alone against 4 armed men. Before she could reconsider, Bird closed the back door quietly and moved through the kitchen, finding a heavy iron skillet hanging on the wall. Not her preferred weapon, but it would serve if needed. She positioned herself just inside the kitchen doorway, out of sight but able to hear the front door open as Sam greeted the visitors. "Morning, gentlemen." Sam's voice was casual, but Bird could hear the tension underneath. "What brings you to Lone Pine?" "Looking for someone." The answering voice was cold, professional. "Apache woman goes by Singing Bird. Killed a man up in Helena. Trail leads this way." "Haven't seen any Apache around here," Sam replied evenly. "Just me and my daughters." "Mind if we look around? Won't take but a minute." "Actually, I do mind," Sam said, his tone hardening slightly. "My daughters are upstairs, and I don't allow strangers with guns in my home." A different voice spoke, smoother than the first. "Mr. McAllister, isn't it? I'm Ethan Wolfe. Perhaps you've heard there's a substantial reward for information leading to this woman's capture." Money doesn't interest me much, Mr. Wolf. $500 might change your mind. It wouldn't, Sam said simply. A tense silence followed, broken by the sound of boots shifting on the wooden porch. Your neighbor mentioned your girl was talking about finding a woman by the creek, Wolf continued. Seemed quite excited about it, according to Mrs. Turner. Bird's grip tightened on the skillet. Maggie Turner, the woman who'd heard Sarah's innocent chatter. My daughter has an active imagination, Sam replied. Last week she was convinced she'd found fairy circles in the meadow. Someone laughed, a harsh sound. We're wasting time with this one, Ethan. Let's just search the place. You'll do no such thing. Sam's voice was deadly quiet now. Not without proper authority. We have authority from Western Rail, Wolf said, and from the U.S. Marshal in Helena. Then you know the law well enough to understand you need a warrant to search private property, Sam countered. Do you have one, Mr. Wolf? Another silence, heavier than before. We'll be back, Wolf finally said, with the proper papers. In the meantime, McAllister, I'd think carefully about your situation. Harboring a murderer is a hanging offense. Would be a shame for those girls to lose their father, too. Good day, gentlemen, Sam said, ignoring the threat. Bird heard the men retreat, their boots heavy on the porch steps, followed by the sounds of horses being mounted. Only when the hoofbeats faded into the distance did she emerge from her hiding place. Sam turned to find her standing in the kitchen doorway, skillet still gripped in one hand. His eyebrow raised slightly at the makeshift weapon. Were you planning to fight off 4 armed men with a frying pan? He asked, a hint of grim amusement in his voice. Bird shrugged. Better than nothing. Sam shook his head, but there was a reluctant respect in his eyes. You should have run when you had the chance. I couldn't leave you to face them alone, Bird admitted. Not after what you did for me. Sam studied her for a moment, then sighed. They'll be back, probably with the sheriff. You need to be gone before then. I know. Bird set down the skillet. I'll leave immediately. Pa? Victoria's voice came from the top of the stairs. Are they gone? Yes, Sam called back. You can come down now. Victoria descended the stairs, holding Sarah's hand tightly. Her eyes darted between her father and Bird, taking in the situation with keen perception. They were looking for her, weren't they? Victoria asked, nodding toward Bird. Sam nodded. Yes. And you lied for her. It wasn't a question, but an accusation. I did what I thought was right, Sam said quietly. Victoria's expression tightened. Is she worth risking our home? Our safety? Before Sam could answer, Sarah piped up. Is Miss Bird in trouble, Pa? Sam knelt to his younger daughter's level. Some men think she did something wrong, but they're mistaken. Are they the bad men? Sarah asked, the ones who hurt her? Sam glanced at Bird, then back to Sarah. Maybe, but they won't hurt anyone here, I promise. Victoria made a small sound of frustration. You can't promise that, Pa. Not if you're harboring a... That's enough, Victoria, Sam cut her off firmly. To Bird, he said, you should gather whatever you need. The sooner you're away from here, the better. Bird nodded, understanding his position completely. She'd already put this family at risk by staying one night. She couldn't ask for more. I'll be gone within the hour, she assured him. Thank you for your kindness, Sam. And yours, Sarah. She nodded to Victoria as well, acknowledging the girl's legitimate concerns. Sam straightened, decisions settling over his features. Before you go, I'll give you some provisions. Food, water, basic supplies. The mountains to the north offer good cover if you're heading that way. I can't take your supplies, Bird protested. You can and you will, Sam insisted. I won't send anyone from my home empty-handed into wilderness, no matter the circumstances. Bird recognized the stubborn set of his jaw and nodded her acceptance. Thank you. As Sam moved to gather the promised supplies, Sarah approached Bird, her small face solemn. Will we see you again? The child asked. Bird knelt to the girl's level, touched by her innocent concern. I don't think so, little one, but I'll remember you. Sarah impulsively threw her arms around Bird's neck in a quick hug. I'll remember you too, Miss Bird. Over the child's shoulder, Bird's eyes met Sam's. Something passed between them, a moment of connection neither had expected nor sought. Then Sam looked away, returning to his task of gathering provisions. Within the hour, Bird stood at the edge of the McAllister property, a small pack of supplies slung over her shoulder. Sam had walked her to the boundary, maintaining a watchful eye on the road for any sign of the bounty hunters returning. Head north through the pine forest, he advised. There's an old trapper's cabin about 5 miles in, near a waterfall. It's abandoned now, but still sound enough for shelter. Bird nodded, committing the information to memory. I won't forget what you've done, Sam McAllister. Sam shifted uncomfortably at her gratitude, just trying to do right by a person in need. Few would see it that way, Bird observed, especially with a price on my head. I've never much cared what others think, Sam replied. After a pause, he added, be careful. Wolf strikes me as the type who doesn't give up easily. I've survived worse, Bird said simply. Sam nodded, understanding in his eyes. Godspeed, Singing Bird. With those words, they parted. She toward the uncertain shelter of the forest, he back to the home and daughters he was determined to protect. Neither looked back as they walked away. Yet both felt the pull of something unfinished between them, a conversation only just begun. Little did either know that their paths would cross again far sooner and under far more dramatic circumstances than either could imagine. The nightmare jolted Sam awake in the dead of night, 3 days after Singing Bird's departure. In his dream, he was back in his army days, riding with the 7th Cavalry. Before him stretched a Apache village, peaceful in the dawn light. His commanding officer pointed to marks on a map. Sam's map, his reconnaissance work that had led them here. Burn it all, the officer ordered. Leave no survivors. Sam tried to protest to explain there were only women, children, and old men in this village, but his voice wouldn't work. He watched helplessly as soldiers swarmed through the camp, torches and rifles in hand. A young woman ran toward him, her face transforming from a stranger's to Singing Bird's, her eyes accusing as flames engulfed her. You led them here, she accused. You drew the maps that guided death. Sam woke with a gasp, sweat soaking his shirt despite the cool night. The dream wasn't memory exactly. He'd never witnessed the actual attacks on the villages he'd scouted. But the guilt was real enough. As a scout and map maker for the cavalry, he had indeed created the detailed maps that enabled military strikes against Apache settlements. He'd told himself he was just doing his duty, following orders. That excuse had grown thinner with each village marked on his maps, until finally, after Bear Creek, he'd resigned his commission and walked away from the army for good. But walking away hadn't erased the guilt. Nothing could. Sam rose from his bed, knowing sleep would elude him now. He moved quietly through the darkened house, checking on his daughters before descending to the main room. The embers in the fireplace still glowed faintly, providing just enough light to navigate. From beneath a loose floorboard near his chair, Sam retrieved a small metal box. Inside lay the remnants of his military service, discharge papers, a few medals, and a folded map marked with annotations in his own hand. Locations of Apache settlements throughout the territory, some circled in red, targets that had been neutralized, as his commanders had euphemistically called the massacres. Sam had kept these items not out of pride, but as penance, reminders of a past he could never fully escape. Pa, Victoria's voice came from the stairs. What are you doing up? Sam quickly closed the box, sliding it under his chair. Just couldn't sleep, he said. Go back to bed, Victoria. Instead, she came down the stairs, wrapping a shawl around her nightdress. At 15, Victoria was already showing signs of the beautiful woman she would become, with features that strongly resembled her mother's. You were having the dreams again, she said, not a question, but a statement. Sam nodded reluctantly. Victoria was too perceptive for easy lies. Just old ghosts. She sat in the chair opposite his, studying his face in the dim light. Is it because of her, the Apache woman? Partly, Sam admitted. Seeing her brought back memories. From the war? Sam nodded. He'd never told his daughters the specifics of his military service, only that he'd served as a scout before meeting their mother. Victoria hesitated, then asked the question she'd clearly been holding back for days. Did you believe her? That she didn't kill that man? Sam considered the question seriously. I think I did, he said finally. There was truth in her eyes, even when she was trying to hide things. Like how well she spoke English, Victoria observed. Sam raised an eyebrow, surprised by his daughter's perception. Victoria shrugged. I heard her talking to Sarah, no accent at all. She was educated at a mission school, Sam explained, but pretending limited English probably kept her safer on the road. Victoria nodded, accepting this logic. After a moment, she asked, "Do you think the bounty hunters will come back?" "Probably," Sam acknowledged, "but they have no authority here. And without evidence that she was ever on our property, they can't do much. Unless Mrs. Turner keeps talking about what Sarah said." Sam sighed. Maggie Turner was known for her loose tongue. "We'll handle that if it comes to it. For now, I want you to focus on your own responsibilities, not worry about bounty hunters or Apache fugitives." Victoria looked ready to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "Yes, Pa." She stood, adjusting her shawl. "Will you come back to bed?" Sam shook his head. "Not just yet. You go on." She hesitated, then leaned down and placed a quick kiss on his forehead, a gesture so reminiscent of Elizabeth that it made his chest ache. "Don't stay up all night with your ghosts, Pa," she whispered. "They're not good company." After she'd gone upstairs, Sam retrieved the metal box once more, running his fingers over the map that had haunted his dreams. So many villages marked, so many lives destroyed because of his careful notations of water sources, defensive positions, escape routes. He joined the army believing he was serving his country, protecting settlers from hostilist natives. It had taken witnessing the aftermath of one such protection, seeing the bodies of women and children who had posed no threat to anyone, to understand the truth of what he was enabling. Sam carefully refolded the map and returned it to the box. As he did so, a question formed in his mind, one he hadn't considered before. Had Singing Bird's village been among those he'd helped destroy? The possibility sent a cold tremor through him. If so, the woman he'd sheltered, whose wounds he'd treated, had every right to hate him, perhaps even to kill him if she knew the truth of his past. Sam closed the box and returned it to its hiding place beneath the floorboard. Some ghosts, he reflected, were better left undisturbed. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that his past and Singing Bird's present were connected in ways he had yet to discover, and that their brief encounter had set in motion events that would force him to confront the man he once had been. With that unsettling thought, Sam returned to his chair by the dying fire, prepared to wait out the long hours until dawn brought the familiar routines that kept his darker thoughts at bay. A week passed at Lone Pine with no further sign of the bounty hunters. Life settled back into its familiar rhythm, Sam tending to the fields and livestock, Victoria managing the household, Sarah helping where she could with her limited attention span. But Singing Bird's brief presence had left its mark, most visibly on Sarah, who often spoke of the Apache woman and asked when she might return. "She won't be coming back, Sarah," Victoria explained one evening as she brushed her sister's hair before bed. "She had to leave, remember?" "Because of the bad men?" Sarah asked. Victoria nodded. "Yes, and because she needed to find her own people." Sarah considered this, her small face solemn in the lamplight. "I think she was sad, Tori. She had sad eyes, like Pa." Victoria's hands stilled momentarily in Sarah's curls. The comparison had struck her too, though she hadn't wanted to acknowledge it. Both her father and the Apache woman carried a similar weight, a shadow that seemed to follow them even in moments of quiet. "Pa's just tired," Victoria said, resuming her brushing. "Running a farm isn't easy." "It's not that kind of sad," Sarah insisted with a child's perception. "It's the kind that stays even when you smile." Victoria had no answer for this, recognizing the truth in her sister's observation. Instead, she finished braiding Sarah's hair and tucked her into bed with a kiss on the forehead. Downstairs, she found her father at the kitchen table, repairing a broken harness by lamplight. His strong hands worked methodically, the same hands that could plow a field all day, shoot a rabbit at 50 paces, or gently bandage a cut on Sarah's knee. Victoria watched him silently from the doorway, struck by how much older he looked than his 45 years. The gray at his temples had spread, and lines had deepened around his eyes since her mother's death. But it was more than physical aging. Something essential had withdrawn from him, retreating behind walls of quiet stoicism. "Sarah asleep?" Sam asked without looking up from his work. "Almost," Victoria replied, moving to sit across from him. "She's still talking about that Apache woman." Sam's hands hesitated briefly before continuing their work. "It's natural. We don't get many visitors." "She says Miss Bird had sad eyes like yours." Victoria watched her father carefully as she relayed this. Sam looked up then, surprise flickering across his features before his expression settled back into its usual reserve. Children notice things we think we hide, he said after a moment. Are you sad, Pa? Victoria asked directly, unusual boldness in her question. Sam set down the harness, giving his daughter his full attention. Not sad exactly, he said carefully. Just carrying things. Mother's death, Victoria supplied. That, Sam acknowledged, and other things from before you were born. Was that Victoria wanted to press further, to ask about these other things, the nightmares that sometimes woke him, the metal box he thought she didn't know about. But years of respecting her father's privacy held her back. I'm nearly 16, she said instead. Old enough to help carry things, if you'd let me. Something softened in Sam's eyes. Pride, perhaps, or recognition of the young woman emerging from the girl he'd raised. You already carry more than your share, Victoria. Running this house since your mother passed, helping with Sarah. You're doing fine work. Before Victoria could respond, a sound from outside caught their attention. A horse approaching at speed, unusual for this hour. Sam was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle that always stood near the door. Upstairs, he directed Victoria. Wake Sarah and stay with her. But now, Victoria. The sharpness in his voice brooked no argument. Victoria hurried upstairs as Sam moved to the window, peering out cautiously into the gathering dusk. A single rider was approaching from the main road, pushing his horse hard. As the figure drew closer, Sam recognized the lean form of Reverend Hayes, hunched forward in the saddle with unusual urgency. Sam set aside his rifle and stepped onto the porch just as Hayes pulled his horse to a stop in the yard. Jonathan, Sam greeted him, noting the minister's disheveled appearance with concern. What brings you out at this hour? Hayes dismounted stiffly, his normally neat appearance rumpled from hard riding. Trouble, I'm afraid, he said, his voice low and urgent. Wolf and his men returned to town this afternoon. They've convinced Sheriff Miller to form a search party for the Apache woman. Sam's expression remained carefully neutral. What's that got to do with me? They're saying she was seen heading north from your property the day after they first came here, Hayes replied. Maggie Turner's been talking, and now Wolf is suggesting you not only harbored the fugitive but helped her escape. Sam's jaw tightened. I told them I hadn't seen any Apache. I know, Hayes said wearily, but Wolf is persuasive and the reward money has turned heads. They're planning to search all the northern properties tomorrow, starting with yours. Sam absorbed this news silently, calculating implications and options. I appreciate the warning, Jonathan. Hayes stepped closer, lowering his voice further. Sam, if you did help her, and I'm not asking if you did, you should know there's more to this situation than a simple manhunt. I've been asking questions about this Robert Maxwell and his business dealings. What kind of questions? The kind that lead to uncomfortable answers, Hayes replied grimly. Maxwell's railroad company has been acquiring land through increasingly questionable means. There are rumors of entire Apache settlements being wiped out to clear the way for tracks. Sam's expression darkened. Not rumors, he said quietly. Fact. Hayes studied him with sudden understanding. Your time in the cavalry. Sam nodded once, not elaborating. What else have you heard about Maxwell? He wasn't just a businessman. He had political aspirations, connections in Washington. His death has caused quite a stir in certain circles. Hayes hesitated. And Wolf isn't just a bounty hunter. Word is he worked directly for Maxwell as some kind of enforcer. So this is personal for him, Sam concluded. Not just about the reward. I suspect so, Hayes agreed, which makes him all the more dangerous. The older man glanced toward the darkening sky. I should get back before my absence is noticed. Just wanted to give you fair warning. Sam walked with Hayes to his horse. I appreciate you riding out, Jonathan. Not many would take the risk. The minister smiled faintly. I answer to a higher authority than Ethan Wolf or Sheriff Miller. He mounted his horse with effort, his age showing in the stiffness of his movements. Be careful, Sam, and if you happen to see that Apache woman again, tell her there are those in town who don't believe the charges against her. Sam nodded, watching as Hayes rode away into the gathering darkness. Only when the minister had disappeared from view did he turn back to the house, his mind working through the implications of this new information. Victoria was waiting just inside the door, her expression making it clear she'd overheard at least part of the conversation. They're coming here tomorrow, looking for her? So it seems, Sam replied, seeing no point in hiding the truth. But she's gone, Victoria said. We haven't seen her since that morning. They don't know that, and they may not believe it even if we tell them. Sam moved to the fireplace, stoking the embers to bring the flames back to life. We've done nothing wrong, Victoria. They can search all they want. Victoria studied her father, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. What if they find something? Something to suggest she was here. Sam turned to face his daughter, struck again by how perceptive she'd become. Like what? I don't know, Victoria admitted, but that man, Wolf, he seemed like the type who finds what he wants to find, whether it's there or not. You're not wrong, Sam acknowledged, which is why tomorrow you and Sarah will go into town to visit Mrs. Hayes while the search is conducted. What? No, Victoria protested. We should be here with you. You'll do as I say, Sam replied, his tone firm but gentle. Martha Hayes has been wanting company, and Sarah enjoys her cookies. It's a good arrangement for everyone. Victoria recognized the set of her father's jaw, the same stubbornness she'd inherited. You're trying to protect us. From what, Pa? What aren't you telling me? Sam sighed, recognizing that his daughter deserved more than evasions. Wolf isn't just looking for Singing Bird. He wants to make an example of anyone who helped her. That includes me, if he can find a reason. Fear flickered across Victoria's face. But why? She's just one woman. It's complicated, Sam said, unwilling to burden his daughter with the full truth about Maxwell's operations and what Singing Bird might have witnessed. Sometimes men like Wolf need to prove their power by crushing others. Victoria was silent for a moment, digesting this. Did you help her? She finally asked, beyond letting her stay that night. Sam met his daughter's gaze steadily. I gave her food and directions to a safe place. Nothing any decent person wouldn't do. The old trapper's cabin, Victoria guessed. When Sam's eyebrows rose in surprise, she added, I heard you telling her about it. A flicker of pride crossed Sam's face at his daughter's attentiveness. Yes, the cabin, it's far enough into the mountains that Wolf and his men likely won't find it, especially if they don't know to look there. Unless they make you tell them, Victoria said quietly, the implication clear in her tone. Sam's expression hardened. No man makes me do anything against my will, Victoria. Remember that. Before she could respond, a sound from upstairs caught their attention. Sarah calling for her sister. Victoria hesitated, torn between continuing this conversation and tending to her sibling. Go on, Sam urged gently. Sarah needs you. Victoria nodded reluctantly. We'll talk more about tomorrow. We will, Sam promised. But my decision stands. You and Sarah will visit the Hayes house until the search is complete. Victoria knew better than to argue further, at least for now. She climbed the stairs to attend to Sarah, leaving Sam alone with his thoughts in the growing sense that the past he'd tried to escape was rapidly catching up to him. The wolf attack came without warning. Bird had been gathering herbs near the stream that ran behind the abandoned trapper's cabin, her makeshift home for the past week. The small structure was weathered but sound, providing adequate shelter as she recovered her strength and planned her next move. She'd followed Sam's directions, finding the cabin exactly where he'd described, nestled in a small clearing near a modest waterfall, far enough into the mountains to offer security, but close enough to water and game trails to be sustainable. It had clearly been abandoned for years, but the roof was intact and the stone fireplace still drew properly. Bird had settled into a cautious routine, foraging for food, setting small snares for rabbits, and watching for any sign of pursuit. Each day, without bounty hunters appearing, had allowed her to relax marginally, to believe she might have successfully evaded Wolf and his men. She was kneeling by the stream, medicinal plants spread on a flat stone beside her, when a low growl froze her in place. Slowly, Bird raised her head to find a large gray wolf standing on the opposite bank, its yellow eyes fixed on her with predatory intent. Bird remained motionless, assessing the situation with the calm born of a lifetime in the wilderness. The wolf was lean, its ribs visible beneath its fur, hungry, then, and desperate enough to consider attacking a human. More concerning was the foam visible at the corners of its mouth. Rabies. The knowledge sent ice through Bird's veins. A rabid wolf was unpredictable, impervious to the usual deterrents. It would not be frightened away by shouts or fire. Keeping her movements deliberate and smooth, Bird reached for the knife at her belt, the only weapon she currently possessed. The blade was good for skinning rabbits and cutting herbs, but woefully inadequate against a wolf, especially one beyond reason due to disease. The wolf tensed, sensing her subtle movement. Bird knew she had seconds before it attacked. Rising slowly to her feet, she positioned the knife before her, wishing desperately for the bow she'd been forced to leave behind during her escape from Maxwell's estate. When the wolf leapt, it moved with startling speed despite its weakened condition. Bird sidestepped, slashing with her knife as the animal sailed past her. The blade caught its flank, drawing a yelp of pain, but doing little to deter its attack. The wolf circled, more cautious now, but no less determined. Blood matted its fur where Bird's knife had struck, but the wound wasn't deep enough to be debilitating. It growled, teeth bared, preparing for another lunge. Bird backed toward the trees, looking for something, anything, to improve her odds. A fallen branch caught her eye, thick enough to serve as a club if she could reach it. She edged toward it, keeping her knife pointed toward the wolf. The animal charged again, faster than Bird anticipated. She swung her knife, catching it across the muzzle, but the wolf's momentum carried it into her. Its weight knocked her backward, her head striking a stone as she fell. Stars exploded across Bird's vision, pain radiating from the back of her skull. The wolf was on top of her, jaws snapping for her throat. She managed to get her forearm under its neck, holding it back with strength born of desperation, while her other hand tried to position the knife for a killing blow. The wolf's teeth snapped inches from her face, its hot breath carrying the fetid smell of disease. Bird knew if those teeth broke her skin, she faced a death far worse than simple predation. As her strength began to falter, a shot rang out, echoing through the small clearing. The wolf jerked, a pained yelp escaping it before it collapsed heavily across Bird's body. Dead weight, blood spreading across its matted fur. Bird pushed the animal off her, struggling to a sitting position as her vision swam from the blow to her head. Through the haze, she made out a figure approaching, rifle still raised, steps cautious but purposeful. "Singing Bird," a familiar voice called. "Are you hurt?" Bird blinked, forcing her vision to clear. "Sam," she managed, disbelieving. Samuel McAllister lowered his rifle as he reached her, kneeling to examine the dead wolf with grim satisfaction before turning his attention to her. "Where are you injured?" he asked, eyes scanning her for wounds. "My head," Bird said, wincing as her fingers found the spot where she'd struck the stone. They came away sticky with blood. "The wolf didn't bite me." Relief crossed Sam's features. "Good. That animal was sick. Rabid. Even a scratch from its teeth would be—" He didn't finish the sentence, the consequences too grim to voice. "What are you doing here?" Bird asked, still struggling to comprehend his sudden appearance. "Came to warn you," Sam replied, helping her to her feet. His hands were steady and sure, supporting her until she found her balance. "Wolf's back in town. Convinced the sheriff to organize a search party. They're combing the northern properties tomorrow, starting with mine." Bird stiffened, instantly alert despite her injury. "I need to leave then. They'll find the cabin." "Not necessarily," Sam said. "This place is well off any marked trail, and I didn't tell anyone where it was." He studied her, noting her pallor and the blood in her hair. "But you're in no condition to travel, especially with a head wound." "I've survived worse," Bird insisted, though the world still tilted alarmingly around her. "No doubt," Sam acknowledged, "but you need rest, and that cut needs tending." He gestured toward the cabin. "Let's get you inside. I can look at that wound properly." Bird hesitated, wariness warring with the practical recognition that she needed help. Finally, she nodded, allowing Sam to guide her toward the small structure. Inside the cabin, sunlight filtered through cracks in the walls, illuminating the sparse interior. Bird had made few changes to the space. A bed of pine boughs covered with the blankets Sam had provided, a small fire in the stone hearth, herbs hanging to dry from the rafters. Sam helped her to sit on the edge of the makeshift bed, then retrieved his canteen and a clean cloth from his saddlebag. "Let me see," he said, gently probing the wound on the back of her head. Bird winced but remained still as he cleaned away the blood. His touch was clinical but careful, the same steady hands that had tended her bullet graze a week earlier. "Not as bad as it looks," Sam pronounced finally. "Head wounds always bleed more dramatically than they deserve. But you might have a concussion. You need to rest." Bird turned to face him, finding him closer than she'd realized. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the space between them. A recognition, perhaps, of the strangeness of their circumstances. Two people from different worlds, connected by chance and danger. "Why did you come?" Bird asked softly. "You've already risked enough for a stranger." Sam looked away, busying himself with returning the cloth to his saddlebag. "Seemed like the decent thing to do," he said simply. "Warning you about Wolf." Bird studied his profile, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. "You could have stayed away, protected your daughters by denying any knowledge of me. Yet here you are." Sam turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "Reverend Hayes brought news about Maxwell and his company, about Apache villages being destroyed to clear land for railroads." He paused. "It wasn't just your village, was it?" Bird shook her head slowly. "No. At least 5 that I know of, all wiped out within months of refusing to sell their land." Sam's jaw tightened. "And you have proof of Maxwell's involvement?" "I had documents," Bird replied. "Papers I took from his office the night he was killed. Orders he signed authorizing payment to remove obstacles. His euphemism for murder." Her hands clenched in her lap. "I lost them and when I fled. Wolf knows I had them, which is why he's so determined to find me." "Not just for Maxwell's murder," Sam concluded. "If those papers became public, many powerful men would be implicated," Bird confirmed, including some in Washington who approved the land seizures. Sam absorbed this information silently, pieces falling into place. After a moment, he asked, "Your village, where was it?" Bird looked at him questioningly. "Near Bear Creek, William." The name hit Sam like a physical blow. Bear Creek, the last reconnaissance mission he'd conducted before resigning his commission. He'd mapped that area meticulously, noting the Apache settlement, the water sources, the best approaches for cavalry. His reaction must have shown on his face because Bird's expression changed, sudden wariness entering her eyes. "What is it? What do you know about Bear Creek?" Sam met her gaze directly, knowing he owed her the truth. "I was there," he said quietly. "Not during the attack, but before. I was a scout for the 7th Cavalry. I made the maps they used to find your village." Bird went completely still, her dark eyes widening as the implications registered. For a long moment, neither spoke, the weight of history hanging between them. "You," Bird finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You guided them to us?" Sam didn't look away, accepting her anger as his due. "I mapped the area, yes, but I didn't know." He stopped, refusing to hide behind ignorance. "I told myself I didn't know what would happen to the settlements I marked, but part of me did know. And I kept making these maps anyway." Bird rose from the bed, putting distance between them despite her unsteady legs. "You marked my people for death," she said, each word precise and cutting. "Yes," Sam acknowledged, making no attempt to excuse his actions. "It's why I left the army after Bear Creek. When I learned what happened there, the women, children, elders." He shook his head, unable to continue. Bird stared at him, conflict evident in her expression, anger warring with confusion at this man who had helped her even while carrying such guilt. "Why tell me this?" she finally asked. "Why admit your role?" "Because you deserve to know who I was," Sam replied simply, "and because I can't offer real help without being honest about my past." "Your help led to the destruction of my tribe," Bird said bitterly. "Why would I want it now?" "Because despite what I did then, I'm trying to do right now," Sam answered, "and because you're still in danger. Wolf won't stop hunting you." Bird turned away, moving to the small window that overlooked the clearing where the wolf's body still lay. The animal had been driven mad by disease, becoming a danger to everything around it. Was that not similar to what greed and power had done to men like Maxwell? To the army Sam had once served? "I should hate you," she said quietly, still facing the window. "For what you did, for your part in it." "You have every right to," Sam acknowledged, remaining where he stood. Bird turned back to him, her expression complicated by emotions she couldn't fully name. "Yet you saved my life. Twice now. You risked your safety and your daughter's to help me." She shook her head slightly. "Why?" Sam considered the question seriously. "Maybe I'm trying to balance scales that can never be balanced," he finally said. "Or maybe I just couldn't turn away from someone who needed help, regardless of the past." The honesty of his answer resonated with Bird. despite her anger. She recognized in Sam a man trying to atone for sins he could never fully absolve, much as she had been trying to find justice for a people who could never truly be avenged. "What happens now?" she asked, the immediate danger reasserting itself in her thoughts. "You rest," Sam replied practically. "Let that head wound heal. I'll come back tomorrow evening, after Wolf and his men have searched my property. Bring more supplies." Bird nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom of his suggestion despite her lingering wariness. "And if they follow you?" "They won't," Sam said with quiet confidence. "I know these mountains better than they do." A silence fell between them, neither comfortable nor entirely strained, a space of reassessment as they considered each other in light of these new revelations. Finally, Bird spoke again, her voice measured. "Thank you for telling me the truth about Bear Creek. And for saving me from the wolf." Sam nodded, accepting her words without pushing for forgiveness he knew he hadn't earned. "Rest," he repeated, moving toward the door. "I'll return tomorrow." As he stepped outside, Sam paused, turning back to her. "For what it's worth, I've regretted my part in what happened every day since. It doesn't change anything, I know, but I wanted you to hear it." With those words, he was gone, leaving Bird alone in the small cabin, with thoughts as turbulent as the stream that rushed past outside. Thoughts of loss and survival, of guilt and redemption, and of the strange twist of fate that had brought her face to face with a man who had unknowingly helped destroy her world and was now trying to save her from those who would finish the job. Victoria McAllister stood at the edge of the porch, watching as a group of riders approached Lone Pine along the main trail. The morning sun glinted off metal, badge and gun alike, as Sheriff Miller led Ethan Wolf and 4 other men toward the house. "They're here, Pa," she called over her shoulder, keeping her voice steady despite the anxiety curling in her stomach. Sam emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. He'd been up since before dawn, seeing to chores that couldn't wait, regardless of unwelcome visitors. He moved to stand beside Victoria, his expression calm but alert. "Remember what we discussed," he said quietly. "Let me do the talking. If they ask you questions directly, answer truthfully but briefly." Victoria nodded. They'd gone over this several times since Sam had announced his change of plans that morning. She and Sarah would stay at Lone Pine during the search, rather than going to the Hayes home as originally intended. Sam had been adamant about not appearing to hide anything, including his daughters. "What about the cabin?" Victoria asked, keeping her voice low. "If they ask, they won't know to ask," Sam interrupted gently. "It's not on any maps, and few people even remember it exists. Just follow my lead." Sarah appeared in the doorway behind them, her small face solemn. "Are those the bad men, Pa?" she asked, loud enough that Victoria winced. Sam turned, crouching to his younger daughter's level. "No, Sarah, that's Sheriff Miller and some men who are looking for someone. They're going to ask us questions and look around our property. There's nothing to be afraid of." Sarah nodded, but her hand found Victoria's, holding tight. Victoria squeezed reassuringly, silently vowing to keep her sister close during the search. The riders pulled up in the yard, Sheriff Miller dismounting first. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, known more for his ability to maintain peace through compromise than for any particular bravery or integrity. "Morning, Sam," the sheriff called, his manner attempting friendliness, though his eyes were wary. "Hope we're not interrupting your day too early." "Sheriff," Sam acknowledged with a nod. His gaze moved past Miller to Wolf, who remained mounted, studying the property with calculating eyes. "Mr. Wolf." Wolf inclined his head slightly, but didn't speak, letting the sheriff handle the preliminaries. "I expect you know why we're here," Miller continued, adjusting his gun belt in a nervous gesture. "Got reports that Apache woman might have passed through your property. Need to have a look around, ask a few questions." "My land's open to the law," Sam replied evenly. "Though I told Mr. Wolf when he was here before, I haven't seen any Apache in these parts." Wolf finally spoke, his voice carrying the cultured tones of Eastern education despite his frontier attire. "Yet your daughter was heard talking about finding a woman by the creek. Quite specific, according to Mrs. Turner." All eyes turned to Sarah, who shrank behind Victoria's skirts. Sam stepped slightly to the side, drawing attention back to himself. "My youngest has an active imagination," he said calmly. "Last month she was convinced she'd seen fairies in the North Meadow." Wolf's mouth curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps we could hear from the child directly?" Before Sam could respond, Victoria stepped forward, her chin raised. Sarah told Mrs. Turner about a game we were playing, she said clearly. I was teaching her about the Oregon Trail, and we pretended to find a pioneer woman by the creek. It was just make-believe. Victoria held Wolf's gaze steadily, though her heart hammered against her ribs. The lie came more easily than she'd expected, flowing naturally from her desire to protect her family, and surprisingly the Apache woman she'd initially resented. Wolf studied Victoria for a long moment, assessment in his cold eyes. Quite the imagination indeed, he finally said, his tone making it clear he didn't believe her. To the sheriff, he added, we should proceed with the search. Miller nodded, gesturing to the other men to dismount. Sam will need to look in all the buildings, house, barn, storage sheds. Won't take long if you cooperate. As I said, my land's open to the law, Sam repeated. But I'd appreciate if 2 of your men remained outside while you search the house. My daughters are uncomfortable with strangers in their home. Miller hesitated, glancing at Wolf, who gave a barely perceptible nod. That's reasonable, the sheriff agreed. Jones and Peterson can check the outbuildings. Rest of us will start with the house. Sam stepped aside, allowing Miller, Wolf, and 1 deputy to approach the porch. Victoria took Sarah's hand and followed them inside, maintaining the outward composure her father had taught her, while inwardly praying they wouldn't find anything to connect their home to Singing Bird. The search was thorough and methodical. Wolf directed the efforts, examining every room with particular attention to places that might have sheltered a fugitive, closets, the space under beds, even the root cellar accessed through the kitchen floor. Victoria kept Sarah beside her throughout, answering direct questions with calm politeness, while watching Wolf's increasingly frustrated movements. He'd expected to find evidence, she realized, had perhaps even promised his men they would, and its absence was visibly aggravating him. When they reached Sam's bedroom, Wolf paused, his attention caught by something on the washstand. Victoria felt her breath catch as he picked up the small, carved wooden bird that had sat there for as long as she could remember, a gift from her mother to her father years ago. Interesting decoration, Wolf commented, turning the carving in his hands. Not your usual frontier artwork. It was my wife's, Sam said, his voice tight. I'd appreciate you putting it down. Wolf studied the carving a moment longer, then set it back on the washstand with deliberate care. My apologies. Sentimental value, I understand. The search continued through the remaining rooms, including the small alcove off the main room where visitors occasionally stayed. Victoria noticed Wolf examining the cot with particular attention, running his fingers along the frame as if searching for evidence invisible to the casual observer. Finally, finding nothing of note in the house, the group moved outside to confer with the men who'd searched the outbuildings. Their report was equally disappointing to Wolf. No sign of recent occupation by anyone other than the McAllisters. Wolf's expression had hardened into barely concealed anger as he turned back to Sam. Perhaps you'd care to explain why we found tracks leading north from your property? Tracks that match those we've been following from Helena. Sam's expression remained impassive. Many people use the northern trail. Hunters, trappers, travelers passing through. These particular tracks belong to a woman, Wolf countered. Small feet, distinctive pattern. They led directly from behind your house toward the mountains. Victoria held her breath, watching her father carefully. This was dangerous territory, a direct accusation rather than general suspicion. I can't account for everyone who crosses my land, Sam replied evenly. If someone passed through while we were working the fields or sleeping, we wouldn't necessarily know it. Sheriff Miller, clearly uncomfortable with the increasing tension, stepped forward. Sam's right, Wolf. These properties are spread out, lots of open land between them. Someone could pass through without the owners ever knowing. Wolf's cold eyes remained fixed on Sam. And if that someone had been injured, seeking help, surely a decent man would offer assistance. I'd help anyone in genuine need, Sam answered, the careful emphasis on genuine not lost on Victoria. As would most in this valley. A tense silence followed, Wolf clearly weighing his options. Finally, he turned to the sheriff. We've wasted enough time here. The woman was on his property, whether he admits it or not. The tracks prove that much. We should continue north, following her trail. Miller nodded, relieved to be moving on without further confrontation. Appreciate your cooperation, Sam, he said, already moving toward his horse. Wolf lingered a moment longer, his voice lowering so only Sam and Victoria could hear. I know you helped her, McAllister. People like you, soft-hearted, misguided, think you're doing right by interfering with justice. But that woman is dangerous, more than you know. If you're so concerned with justice, Sam replied quietly, why not seek a proper trial instead of a bounty hunt? Something cold flickered in Wolf's eyes. Some crimes can't wait for the slow wheels of courtroom justice, especially when powerful interests are at stake. Powerful interests like Western Rail? Sam suggested, his tone carefully neutral. Wolf's expression shifted slightly, surprise quickly masked. You're better informed than I expected, he acknowledged out, which makes your interference even more foolish. You have daughters to consider, McAllister. Would be a shame for them to suffer for your poor judgment. Victoria stepped closer to her father, anger overcoming her fear. My father's judgment is just fine, Mr. Wolf, she said clearly. It's taught us to recognize right from wrong. Wolf's gaze shifted to her, reassessment in his eyes. Brave words from a child, he said, his tone almost gentle. I hope you never have cause to regret them. With that parting comment, he turned and mounted his horse, rejoining the search party that was already heading toward the northern trail. Only when they had disappeared from sight did Victoria release the breath she'd been holding. He knows, she said quietly to her father. About the cabin? Sam shook his head slightly. He suspects I helped her, but he doesn't know where she went. The mountains cover a lot of ground. Sarah tugged at Victoria's skirt. Did we win? She asked, her young face serious. Did we beat the bad men? Victoria exchanged a glance with her father, reading the concern in his eyes despite his outward calm. For now, she said, lifting Sarah into her arms despite her being nearly too big for such treatment. For now, we did. Sam watched the northern trail for a long moment, his expression distant. Victoria recognized that look. Her father was already planning his next move, calculating risks and options. You're going to warn her, Victoria said. Not a question, but a statement. Sam turned to his daughter, surprise and something like pride crossing his features. Yes, he confirmed. Tonight after they have moved farther north. Victoria nodded, accepting this decision more easily than she would have a week ago. Be careful, Pa. Wolf isn't just after her anymore. He's watching you too. Sam's hand came to rest briefly on Victoria's shoulder, a rare gesture of physical affection from her usually reserved father. I will, he promised. And Victoria, thank you for what you said to Wolf. It took courage. Victoria straightened slightly under his hand, warmth spreading through her at his approval. I meant it, she said simply. I know, Sam replied. That's what makes it matter. As they turned back toward the house, Victoria found herself reflecting on how much had changed in just 1 week. Her perception of her father, her understanding of the world beyond their property, and her own capacity for bravery in the face of threat. All because of an Apache woman who had stumbled into their lives, bringing danger but also awakening something that had been dormant in their family since her mother's death. Whatever happened next, Victoria realized, they would face it differently than they would have before Singing Bird's arrival. More openly, more together, more alive. And for now, that seemed like progress, despite the shadows still gathering on the horizon. Twilight settled over the mountains, painting the western sky in strokes of amber and purple as Sam McAllister made his way along the hidden trail to the trapper's cabin. He'd left Lone Pine after supper, telling Victoria he'd be back before midnight and instructing her to keep the rifle close while he was gone. His older daughter had nodded, her eyes reflecting an understanding beyond her years. If I'm not back by dawn, he'd told her quietly, away from Sarah's hearing, take your sister to Reverend Hayes. He'll know what to do. But Victoria had paled slightly, but nodded. You'll be back, she'd said, the words somewhere between reassurance and command. Now, as twilight deepened into true darkness, Sam moved with the caution of a man who understood wilderness and danger alike. He'd taken a circuitous route, doubling back several times to ensure he wasn't followed. Wolf and his search party had moved north as planned, but Sam didn't trust the bounty hunter not to have left men watching Lone Pine. The cabin came into view as he rounded the final bend in the trail, a dark silhouette against the deepening blue of the eastern sky. No light showed from its single window, but thin smoke rose from the chimney, sign that Bird was there, keeping the fire low to avoid detection. Sam approached openly, making enough noise that she would hear his arrival rather than be startled by it. Still, when the door opened, he found himself facing the business end of his own hunting knife, the one he'd included in the supplies he'd given her a week earlier. "It's me," he said quietly, raising his hand slightly. Bird lowered the knife immediately, stepping back to allow him entry. "I wasn't certain you'd come," she admitted as he closed the door behind him. In the dim firelight, Sam could see that the gash on her head had begun to heal, though a dark bruise still spread across her temple. She moved with her usual fluid grace, apparently recovered from the wolf attack. "Said I would," Sam replied simply, setting down the pack he'd brought. "Brought more supplies, food, ammunition for the rifle you left with, some medicine." He paused, studying her face in the uncertain light. "How's the head?" "Healing," Bird answered, unconsciously touching the bruised area. "The dizziness has passed." She gestured to the pack. "You didn't need to bring more supplies. I've been hunting, gathering." "Figured extra wouldn't hurt." Sam moved to the hearth, warming his hands over the small fire. The nights were growing cooler as autumn advanced, and the cabin's thin walls offered minimal protection against the mountain chill. Bird watched him, her expression guarded yet curious. Their last conversation, his revelation about his role in mapping her village, hung between them, unresolved yet not forgotten. "Wolf and his men searched your farm today," she said finally, a statement rather than a question. Sam nodded. "This morning, Sheriff Miller was with them." "Did they find anything? Any sign I'd been there?" "Nothing inside. Wolf spotted tracks leading north from our property, likely yours from when you left." Sam's mouth curved in a grim smile. He was quite frustrated by the lack of evidence. Bird's shoulders relaxed marginally. "Then your family is safe." "For now," Sam agreed, "but Wolf isn't giving up. He as much as threatened my daughters before he left." Bird's expression hardened. "Because of me. Because you helped me. Because he's the kind of man who uses fear to get what he wants," Sam corrected. "My decision to help you was mine alone." A silence fell between them, filled only by the soft crackling of the fire. Finally, Bird spoke again, her voice quieter. "I've been thinking about what you told me, about Bear Creek." Sam stiffened slightly but held her gaze. "What about it?" "My grandfather was the tribe's elder," Bird said, the words coming slowly as if extracted at great cost. "When the soldiers came, he walked out to meet them, arms raised in peace. They shot him where he stood. I was hiding in the rocks with my brother. We saw everything." Sam's expression tightened with pain and regret. "I'm sorry," he said, the words wholly inadequate for the magnitude of what she'd lost. Bird nodded, accepting the apology for what it was, sincere if insufficient. "My brother, Grey Wolf, was older. He pulled me away when I would have run to grandfather's body. We hid in the hills for days, watching from a distance as they burned our village." Her voice remained steady, but her hands had clenched into fists. "I hated all white men after that. Swore I would avenge my people." "What changed?" Sam asked quietly. "Time. Experience." Bird met his gaze directly, learning that not all white men are the same, just as not all Apache are the same. "Some of my own people sold information to the army for personal gain." "Doesn't excuse what we did," Sam said. "No," Bird agreed, "but understanding that evil and good exist in all peoples, it complicated my hatred." Sam nodded, recognizing the hard-won wisdom in her words. "What happened to your brother?" A shadow crossed Bird's face. "We were separated 2 years after Bear Creek. Another raid, another escape. I thought he died. Later, I heard rumors that some from our tribe survived, moved further into the mountains. I've been searching for them, between other pursuits." "Pursuing Maxwell," Sam supplied. Bird inclined her head in acknowledgement. "After the mission school, I worked as a domestic servant for several wealthy families. It allowed me to move in white society unnoticed. When I learned Maxwell was responsible for the attacks on Apache settlements, I secured a position in his household." Her expression darkened. "What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. Not just my village, but many others. All for land that would increase in value once the railroad came through." "And you confronted him," Sam concluded. "I found documents in his study, orders for the attacks. Financial records showing payments to mercenaries, correspondence with officials who were bribed to look the other way. Bird's voice remained level, but her eyes flashed with old anger. I took the papers and confronted him. He laughed, said no one would believe an Apache over a respected businessman. What happened then? We argued, he threatened me. Then someone else entered the study, a shot was fired. Bird's gaze became distant with memory. I didn't see who it was. When I turned back, Maxwell was dead, and I was standing over his body with the stolen papers. I ran. Sam absorbed this, fitting it with what he already knew or suspected. You think Wolf was the shooter, he said finally. Bird nodded. It makes sense. He worked directly for Maxwell, handling his more delicate matters. Perhaps Maxwell had become a liability, or perhaps Wolf saw an opportunity to advance himself. By framing you for the murder, Sam concluded, and retrieving the damning papers at the same time. Yes, Bird moved to the cabin's single window, gazing out at the darkness. Those documents were the only proof of what Maxwell had done. Without them, it's my word against the entire Western Rail Corporation. Sam was silent for a moment, considering the implications. What did you do with the papers? Bird turned back to him, her expression unreadable. I hid them before fleeing, somewhere Wolf would never think to look. Understanding dawned on Sam's face. Here? In these mountains? Bird nodded slowly. There's a cave about 3 miles north of this cabin, behind a waterfall. The papers are sealed in an oilskin pouch, hidden in a crevice near the back wall. Sam let out a long breath, the significance of this revelation settling over him. That's why you haven't left the area, despite the danger. You're protecting the evidence. It's all I have, Bird said simply, the only hope for justice for my people. It's also what keeps Wolf hunting you so relentlessly, Sam pointed out. He can't risk those papers becoming public. No, Bird agreed, which is why he'll never stop until I'm dead. Or he is. The starkness of her statement hung in the air between them. Sam recognized the truth in it. Wolf would indeed continue his pursuit until one of them was no longer a threat. We need to get those papers to someone who can use them properly, Sam said finally. Someone with the authority and integrity to act on them. Who? Bird's skepticism was evident in her tone. The same officials who took Maxwell's bribes? The army that carried out the attacks? The territorial governor who granted the land rights? Reverend Hayes, Sam suggested. He has connections in the Eastern churches, influential people who oppose the mistreatment of Native peoples. He could get the documents to the right hands. Bird considered this, weighing the suggestion against her deep-seated distrust of white institutions. Perhaps, she conceded finally. But first we would need to retrieve the papers, and with Wolf and his men searching the mountains. I'll go, Sam offered immediately. You can describe the location. They're not watching for me the way they're watching for you. Bird shook her head. The cave is difficult to find if you don't know exactly where to look. Hidden behind the waterfall, accessible only by a narrow ledge. She paused, then added with reluctant respect. Besides, you've risked enough already. Then we go together, Sam said decisively. Tomorrow night. Between us, we can retrieve the papers and bring them to Hayes before Wolf realizes what's happening. Bird studied him, assessing his determination. Why, May? She asked finally. Why risk yourself for this? For me? Sam held her gaze steadily. Because it's the right thing to do. Because those responsible for Bear Creek and the other villages should answer for what they did. His voice lowered slightly. And because I need to balance the scales, however I can. Bird recognized the weight of guilt and responsibility that drove him, the same forces that had driven her own pursuit of justice. Despite their different paths, they had arrived at the same destination, a need to make right what had been so terribly wrong. Tomorrow night, then, she agreed, we'll retrieve the papers together. Sam nodded, sealing their pact. As he prepared to leave, gathering his hat and checking that the path outside remained clear, Bird spoke again. Sam, she said quietly, thank you for believing me, for helping despite everything. Sam turned back to her, his expression softening slightly. Get some rest, he replied. Tomorrow will come soon enough. With those words, he slipped out into the darkness, leaving Bird alone with thoughts of hidden papers, pursuit, and justice. and the unexpected ally who had once helped map her people's destruction and was now risking everything to help make amends. Victoria couldn't sleep. The house felt different with her father away, every creak and settling sound amplified in the darkness. Sarah slumbered peacefully beside her, curled beneath the quilt with complete trust that all would be well. Victoria envied her sister's innocent confidence. At 15, she was old enough to understand the danger that had entered their lives with the arrival of Singing Bird and the subsequent interest of Ethan Wolfe. Her father's instructions about what to do if he didn't return by dawn had only heightened her anxiety. After an hour of restless turning, Victoria slipped from the bed, careful not to disturb Sarah. She pulled a shawl around her nightdress and moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit yard. Everything appeared peaceful, the barn a dark silhouette against the silver-washed fields, the corral empty since they'd moved the horses inside for the night. Victoria was about to turn away when a movement caught her eye, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness near the barn. She froze, heart suddenly pounding. Was it her father returning earlier than expected? No, the figure was moving with too much caution, keeping to the shadows as it approached the house. Instinctively, Victoria reached for the rifle her father had left propped beside the bed. The weight of it was familiar from the shooting lessons Sam had insisted on for both his daughters, though Victoria had never expected to need those skills. Moving silently to the top of the stairs, Victoria positioned herself where she could see the front door while remaining in shadow. The rifle felt heavy in her hands, but she kept it steady, just as her father had taught her. Below, the door handle turned slowly, testing. Locked, as Victoria had ensured before coming upstairs. A pause, then the soft scrape of something against the lock. Someone trying to pick it. Victoria raised the rifle to her shoulder, aiming at the door. Her hands trembled slightly, but her resolve remained firm. Whoever was trying to enter meant them harm. Perhaps one of Wolfe's men, left behind to watch the house. The lock clicked, and the door began to open. Victoria's finger tensed on the trigger. "That's far enough," she called, her voice stronger than she felt. "I have a rifle aimed at the door, and I know how to use it." The door stopped moving. After a tense moment, a man's voice responded, smooth and cultured. Ethan Wolfe. "Miss McAllister," he said, as calmly as if they were meeting at a social gathering. "I apologize for the late hour. I was hoping to speak with your father." "My father isn't here," Victoria replied, keeping the rifle steady. "And decent men knock before entering a home." A soft chuckle came from the darkness beyond the partially open door. "Very true. An oversight on my part." The door opened wider, revealing Wolfe's tall figure silhouetted against the night. "May I come in? I assure you my intentions are peaceful." "Ma, stay where you are," Victoria ordered. "Say what you came to say from there." Wolfe remained in the doorway, respecting her command but not retreating. "Very well. I came to offer your father a proposition, one that could benefit your family greatly." "What kind of proposition?" Victoria asked suspiciously. "Information," Wolfe replied simply. "The location of the Apache woman in exchange for a significant reward. $500 to be precise." He paused, letting the amount register. "Enough to expand your farm, perhaps send you to school in the East. A considerable sum for such a small piece of information." Victoria's grip tightened on the rifle. "My father already told you we don't know where she is." "Your father lied," Wolfe said gently, as if explaining something to a child. "Understandable, given his moral inclinations. But I thought perhaps you might be more practical, more concerned with your family's future than with protecting a murderer." "She's not a murderer," Victoria responded before she could stop herself. Wolfe's posture changed subtly, interest sharpening his stance. "Oh? And how would you know that, Miss McAllister, if you've never met her?" Victoria remained silent, cursing her impulsive words. "I see," Wolfe continued, his voice taking on a note of false sympathy. "Your father has convinced you of her innocence. A touching display of faith, if misguided." He took a single step forward. "Where is he tonight, I wonder? Certainly not tending to farm business at this hour." "Don't come any closer," Victoria warned, raising the rifle slightly. Wolfe stopped, hands lifting in a placating gesture. "No need for that. I'm merely having a conversation." His tone hardened slightly. "But you should know, Miss McAllister, that harboring a fugitive is a serious crime. Your father could face imprisonment. What would happen to you and your sister then? Fear clutched at Victoria's heart, but she kept her voice steady. My father hasn't done anything wrong. The law might see it differently, Wolf countered, especially if evidence were to be discovered on your property. Evidence I could ensure is found or not found, depending on your cooperation. The threat was clear, and Victoria felt a surge of anger replacing her fear. This man was attempting to manipulate a 15-year-old girl through intimidation, threatening to frame her father if she didn't cooperate. Mr. Wolf, she said, her voice cold, I believe you should leave now, and you can take your blood money with you. Wolf studied her for a long moment, reassessment in his gaze. You're more like your father than I realized, he observed, principled to the point of foolishness. He stepped back into the doorway. Very well, I'll leave you to your night watch. But remember my offer and my warning. Time is running short for your father to make the right choice. With those parting words, he withdrew, pulling the door closed behind him. Victoria remained frozen at the top of the stairs, rifle still aimed, until she heard the sound of hoofbeats retreating down the drive. Only then did she lower the weapon, her arms suddenly trembling with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. She moved to the window, watching as Wolf's silhouette disappeared into the night before hurrying back to check on Sarah. Her sister slept on, undisturbed by the confrontation, her face peaceful in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed, rifle across her lap, and prepared for a long vigil until her father's return. Whatever Wolf's game was, she knew one thing with certainty. They were running out of time, and her father, wherever he was tonight, needed to know about this visit as soon as he returned. The waterfall gleamed silver in the moonlight, its constant roar drowning out all other night sounds as Sam and Bird approached cautiously. They had left the cabin shortly after nightfall, traveling by the most hidden paths through the dense forest that covered the northern slopes. Bird led the way, moving with the silent confidence of one who knew these mountains intimately. Sam followed close behind, rifle ready, his experienced eyes continuously scanning for any sign of Wolf's search party. So far, they had encountered no one. The mountains were vast, and Wolf's men, unfamiliar with the terrain, were likely keeping to the more obvious trails rather than the game paths Bird had chosen. They paused at the edge of the small clearings that fronted the waterfall, assessing the open ground they would need to cross to reach it. The entrance is behind the fall, Bird explained quietly, her voice barely audible above the water's thunder. There's a narrow ledge that runs behind the curtain of water, leading to the cave. Sam nodded, eyes tracing the route they would need to take. You go first, he said. I'll cover you, then follow. Bird moved forward without hesitation, keeping low as she crossed the moonlit clearing. The spray from the waterfall dampened her clothes as she approached, silver droplets clinging to her hair like tiny stars. At the edge of the pool formed by the falling water, she paused, glancing back once to ensure Sam was watching, then slipped sideways onto a narrow shelf of rock that disappeared behind the cascade. Sam waited until she had vanished behind the silver curtain before following, moving with the measured caution of a man accustomed to dangerous situations. The ledge was treacherous, wet stone barely wide enough for a sure footing, with the thundering water on one side and a steep drop to jagged rocks on the other. He edged along carefully, back pressed against the cliff face. The roar of water filled his ears, and spray soaked his clothing, making his grip on the rifle slippery. After what seemed an eternity of careful sidesteps, the ledge widened slightly, curving into darkness beyond the waterfall. Bird waited just inside, her form a darker shadow against the cave's blackness. As Sam joined her, she touched his arm, guiding him further inside where the noise of the falls diminished enough for quiet conversation. The cave extends back about 50 feet, she explained, her voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. The papers are hidden in a crevice near the rear wall. I'll need the lantern. Sam unslung the small pack he carried, removing a bullseye lantern he'd brought for this purpose. He lit it carefully, the flame casting long shadows across the cave's rough walls. Bird took the lantern, leading the way deeper into the cave. The air grew cooler as they moved away from the entrance, with a damp mineral smell that reminded Sam of his brief time in the mining camps before the war. At the back of the cave, Bird raised the lantern, illuminating a narrow fissure in the stone wall, just wide enough to insert an arm. Here, she said, handing the light to Sam. Hold this steady. Sam held the lantern high as Bird reached into the crevice, her face tense with concentration as her fingers searched for the hidden package. After a moment, relief washed over her features. It's still here, she said, withdrawing a small oilskin bundle from its hiding place. Untouched. She unwrapped the oilskin carefully, revealing a stack of papers protected from the cave's dampness by the waterproof material. Even in the lantern's limited light, Sam could see official letterheads, signatures, and maps that reminded him uncomfortably of his own work for the cavalry. These prove everything, Bird said, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. Maxwell's orders, payments to mercenaries, bribes to officials, correspondence with railroad investors who knew exactly what was happening to the Apache on those lands. Sam nodded, understanding the importance of what they held. We need to get these to Hayes immediately. Tonight, if possible. Bird rewrapped the papers carefully and tucked them inside her jacket. The nearest trail that will take us directly to town is about 2 miles east of here. If we... She stopped abruptly, head tilting as if listening. Sam immediately extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness. For a long moment they stood motionless, straining to hear past the constant roar of the waterfall. Then it came again, a sound that didn't belong. Voices, faint but growing clearer. Men approaching the waterfall. Wolf, Bird whispered, the single word laden with tension. Sam nodded, though she couldn't see it in the darkness. They must have picked up our trail somehow. He felt for her arm in the blackness, guiding her toward the cave entrance. We need to move, now. They made their way carefully through the dark cave, Sam leading now, one hand on the rough wall to orient himself. As they neared the entrance, the voices became clearer, carried on the night air despite the waterfall's roar. Tracks lead this way. She's been here recently. Wolf's distinctive, cultured tones were unmistakable. Behind the waterfall? Another voice questioned skeptically. Seems far-fetched. Check it, Wolf ordered. Peterson, Jenkins, circle around to the top of the falls. Make sure there's no other way out. Sam and Bird pressed themselves against the cave wall just inside the entrance, out of sight but able to see the clearing through the curtain of water. Lantern light bobbed between the trees as Wolf's men approached, illuminating at least 4 figures. We're trapped, Bird whispered, the words barely audible even to Sam beside her. Sam's mind raced, assessing options. The cave had only one entrance, now being approached by Wolf's men. The ledge behind the waterfall was too exposed for an escape attempt. They would be spotted immediately. Fighting was a last resort. While Sam was confident in his abilities, the odds of 4 to 2 were poor, especially in such confined quarters. A desperate plan formed in his mind. The papers, he said urgently, give them to me. Bird hesitated only briefly before passing him the oilskin package. Sam tucked it securely inside his coat, then reached for his rifle, checking that it was loaded and ready. When I move, you stay here, he instructed. Wait until their attention is on me, then slip out and head east. Get to Hayes. Bird's hand gripped his arm. They'll kill you. Maybe, Sam acknowledged grimly. But they'll have to catch me first. He met her eyes in the dim light filtering through the waterfall. This is bigger than either of us now. Those papers need to reach someone who can use them. I can't let you sacrifice yourself, Bird protested. Not for me, not for you, Sam interrupted gently. For justice. For those who died at Bear Creek and all the other villages. He paused. For the scales that need balancing. Before Bird could argue further, a shout came from outside. There's a ledge here, behind the water. Sam squeezed Bird's hand once, a silent farewell, then moved toward the cave entrance. The element of surprise was their only advantage, and it would be brief. Taking a deep breath, he burst from behind the waterfall, rifle raised, and fired a shot into the air. The loud crack echoed across the clearing, startling Wolf's men who scrambled for cover. McAllister! Wolf's voice cut through the confusion, recognition, and fury in his tone. Sam didn't wait for more. He plunged into the pool beneath the falls, the cold water shocking his system as he drove himself toward the far shore. Bullets splashed around him, but the darkness and the churning water made him a difficult target. Reaching the shore, Sam sprinted for the trees, zigzagging to avoid the shots still firing behind him. He glanced back once to see Wolf directing his men to pursue, their attention fully focused on him rather than the cave. Good. Bird would have her chance to escape in the opposite direction. As he crashed through the underbrush, Sam allowed himself a grim smile. He might not survive the night, but with luck, the papers would reach Hayes, and some measure of justice would finally be served for the people of Bear Creek. Dawn was breaking over Lone Pine when Victoria heard hoofbeats approaching from the north. She'd maintained her vigil through the night, rifle ready, starting at every sound following Wolf's unsettling visit. Moving to the window, Victoria's heart leapt at the sight of her father's familiar figure. But he was not alone. Riding double with him was the Apache woman, Singing Bird, her dark hair unmistakable, even in the early morning light. Victoria rushed downstairs, throwing open the door as the horse reached the yard. One look at her father's face told her something was terribly wrong. His features were drawn tight with pain, and dark stains that could only be blood marked his clothing. "Pa!" she cried, rushing forward as Sam dismounted stiffly, helping Bird down after him. "It's all right, Victoria," he said, though his pallor and the way he favored his right side suggested otherwise. "Just a graze. Bullet caught him as we escaped," Bird explained, supporting Sam with a strength that belied her slender frame. "The wound needs cleaning." Victoria moved to her father's other side, helping guide him into the house. "Sarah's still sleeping," she reported. "Wolf was here last night, Pa. He came looking for you." Sam's head snapped up at this, alarm replacing the pain in his expression. "Wolf, here? Did he threaten you?" "Not directly," Victoria replied as they helped Sam to a chair. "He offered money for information about her." She nodded toward Bird, then said things could go badly for you if we didn't cooperate. Sam and Bird exchanged a significant look. "He split his forces," Bird concluded, "left men watching your farm while he led the main search party north." "He knows we have the papers," Sam agreed grimly, "or at least suspects it." "What papers?" Victoria asked, bringing the medical supplies her father kept in a chest near the hearth. As Bird expertly began cleaning the bullet graze along Sam's ribs, he explained about the documents that proved Maxwell's crimes against the Apache villages and their retrieval from the cave behind the waterfall. "I created a diversion," he finished, wincing as Bird applied antiseptic to the wound. "Drew them away so Bird could escape with the papers. But Wolf's men were better shots than I'd hoped." "I couldn't leave him," Bird added, her hands gentle but efficient as she bandaged Sam's side. "Not wounded and outnumbered. I circled back, found him a mile downstream where he'd managed to evade the initial pursuit." Victoria absorbed this information, a new respect for the Apache woman forming as she watched the care with which she tended to her father. "Where are the papers now?" she asked. Sam reached inside his coat, withdrawing the oilskin package. "Here, still dry, despite my swim." His expression turned serious. "We need to get these to Reverend Hayes immediately, before Wolf realizes we've returned here." "It's too late for that," a voice came from the doorway. Victoria whirled to find Ethan Wolf standing in the open doorway, pistol drawn and aimed directly at her father. Behind him, two more men appeared, rifles ready. "I must say, McAllister, you led us on quite a chase last night," Wolf continued, stepping into the room with casual confidence. "Impressive for a simple farmer. Almost as if you had military training." Sam remained seated, his hand still on the oilskin package. "Wolf, he acknowledged flatly. "I see breaking into homes is becoming a habit for you." Wolf smiled thinly. "Necessity, I'm afraid." His gaze shifted to Bird, cold assessment in his eyes. "And the notorious Singing Bird, at last. You've been quite troublesome, my dear." Bird stood her ground, positioning herself slightly in front of Sam. "Not half as troublesome as I intend to be, Mr. Wolf." Wolf's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Spirited to the end. I admire that, however misplaced." His attention returned to the package in Sam's hand. "I believe you have something that belongs to my employer." "Your former employer," Sam corrected, "since you killed him." A flicker of surprise crossed Wolf's features, quickly masked. "An interesting theory. Incorrect, but interesting." He extended his hand. "The papers, McAllister." "Now." Sam didn't move. "These documents prove that Maxwell ordered the massacre of Apache villages to clear land for the railroad, that he bribed officials and hired mercenaries to do his dirty work." His gaze hardened. and that you were his right hand in all of it. Ancient history, Wolf dismissed, and irrelevant now. The railroad will be built regardless. Progress demands certain sacrifices. Murder isn't sacrifice, Bird said, her voice tight with controlled anger. It's a crime. Wolf sighed as if dealing with particularly obtuse children. The papers, McAllister, he repeated. Or my men will start with your eldest daughter and work their way through your family until you comply. Victoria felt cold fear wash through her at the casual threat, but she stood her ground, shifting slightly to place herself between the gunman and the stairs that led to where Sarah still slept. The tension in the room was palpable, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth. Sam's hand tightened around the oilskin package, his eyes never leaving Wolf's. You won't harm my family, Sam stated, his voice calm but with steel beneath it. Take the papers if you must, but leave my daughters out of this. Wolf's smile widened. A wise decision, McAllister. Though I must say your newfound conscience is rather inconvenient. You never questioned orders when you were making Apache settlements for the cavalry. The revelation hung in the air, Victoria's sharp intake of breath the only sound. Her eyes darted to her father, confusion and shock evident in her expression. Pa? She whispered. Before Sam could respond, the sound of breaking glass shattered the silence as the back window exploded inward. A figure crashed through, landing in a crouch with the fluid grace of a predator. A tall Apache man rose to his full height, a rifle aimed steadily at Wolf's head. Step away from my sister, he commanded, his English perfect and cold. Bird's eyes widened in disbelief. Grey Wolf? She breathed, the name of prayer and question combined. The distraction was momentary but sufficient. Sam lunged forward, knocking Wolf's pistol aside as Bird seized a fire poker and swung it at the nearest gunman. Victoria grabbed Sarah, who had appeared at the top of the stairs, pulling her sister back into the relative safety of the upper floor. Chaos erupted in the small room. Wolf's men fired wildly, splintering wood and shattering the family's modest possessions. Grey Wolf returned fire with deadly precision, downing one of Wolf's men instantly. Sam grappled with Wolf, their struggle fierce and desperate. Despite his wound, Sam fought with the determination of a man protecting everything he loved. The oilskin package fell from his coat during the struggle, sliding across the floor toward the hearth. Bird moved to retrieve it, but Wolf broke free from Sam long enough to aim his recovered pistol at her. The papers die with you, he snarled. The shot that rang out came not from Wolf's gun, but from the top of the stairs. Victoria stood with her father's spare rifle, smoke still curling from the barrel. Her hands shook, but her aim had been true. Wolf staggered, clutching at his shoulder where Victoria's bullet had struck. The momentary advantage was all Sam needed. He tackled Wolf, driving him to the ground with enough force to knock the pistol from his grasp. Grey Wolf quickly subdued the remaining gunman, while Bird retrieved the precious documents. It's over, Wolf, Sam said, pinning the man beneath him. The truth about Maxwell, about the massacres, it all comes out now. Wolf's cold composure finally cracked, hatred blazing in his eyes. You think this changes anything? Maxwell had powerful friends. The railroad will still be built. Progress doesn't steep for sentiment or justice. Perhaps, came a new voice from the doorway. Reverend Hayes stood there, shotgun in hand, Sheriff Miller beside him looking thoroughly uncomfortable. But murder and corruption do stop when exposed to the light of day. Hayes entered, his normally gentle eyes hard as he surveyed the scene. I suspected something was wrong when I saw Wolf's men heading this way instead of continuing north. Seems I arrived just in time. The sheriff reluctantly took custody of Wolf and his remaining man. As Hayes helped Sam to his feet, the pothole of the fight became apparent. Blood soaked the side of Sam's shirt. His wound had reopened in the struggle, and fresh damage had been done. Pa! Victoria cried, rushing down the stairs with Sarah close behind. Sam tried to reassure them, but his legs buckled. Bird was at his side instantly, guiding him to the floor as Grey Wolf kept watch over the prisoners. He's losing too much blood, Bird said, her experienced hands already working to assess the damage. The bullet wound has torn open completely, and there's a new injury, a knife wound beneath his ribs. Victoria's face went pale. Can you help him? Bird met her gaze steadily. Yes, but I'll need my medicine pouch. Gray Wolf? Her brother nodded, understanding the unspoken request. From his satchel, he produced a small leather bag decorated with intricate beadwork. I kept it when I thought you were gone, he explained. Always hoped I'd return it to you someday. As Bird began her work, Gray Wolf explained how he and a small group of Apache had survived the Bear Creek massacre, retreating deep into the mountains. They had been watching Bird for days, following her trail, waiting for the right moment to make contact. We saw the bounty hunters tracking you, he told his sister as she worked over Sam. We've been eliminating their scouts, disrupting their search parties. When we saw you and this man heading for the sacred cave, we knew it was time to intervene. Hours passed as Bird fought to save Sam's life. Victoria and Sarah assisted, following her instructions without question, while Hayes and Gray Wolf secured the prisoners and sent for additional help from town. Night had fallen by the time Bird sat back, exhaustion etched on her face but satisfaction in her eyes. The bleeding has stopped. His spirit is strong. He fights to stay with us. Sam lay pale but breathing steadily on a makeshift bed near the hearth. Victoria sat beside him, holding his hand, while Sarah had finally succumbed to exhaustion and slept curled in a chair nearby. Will he live? Victoria asked, her young face showing a maturity beyond her years. Bird nodded. Yes, but he needs rest and care. The healing has just begun. Gray Wolf, who had been conferring quietly with Hayes, approached his sister. The medicine song, he suggested, like grandfather taught us. Bird looked surprised, then nodded. She began to sing softly, a melody ancient and haunting. Gray Wolf joined her, their voices blending in perfect harmony. The song filled the small house, seeming to vibrate in the very walls. To Victoria's amazement, Sam's breathing deepened, color gradually returning to his face. The song continued, Bird and Gray Wolf circling the bed in the traditional healing ritual of their people. After some hesitation, Victoria found herself humming along, picking up the repeated phrases. When Bird smiled encouragingly at her, Victoria's voice grew stronger, chanting the ancient song, a bridge forming between cultures, between past and future. Spring came early to Oak Ridge Valley that year. The snow melted from the fields by mid-March, and green shoots pushed through the dark earth with determined vigor. At Lone Pine Farm, life had settled into a new rhythm in the months following what the townspeople now called the Wolf Incident. Ethan Wolf and his surviving men had been tried and convicted, not only for the attack on the McAllister home, but for the murder of Robert Maxwell. The documents Bird had preserved provided irrefutable evidence of the conspiracy to destroy Apache settlements for the railroad's benefit, implicating several officials in territorial government. The scandal had reached all the way to Washington, resulting in new protections for native lands and a formal investigation into the treatment of Apache peoples throughout the territory. On a warm April morning, Sam stood on the hill overlooking his property, his side still tender, but healing well under Bird's continued care. Beside him, Bird watched as Gray Wolf directed the construction of traditional dwellings on the adjacent land that had been officially deeded to the survivors of the Bear Creek tribe through Reverend Hayes' tireless advocacy. Your brother is a natural leader, Sam observed. Bird nodded, pride evident in her expression. Like our grandfather, he protects our people, but also teaches them to adapt, to find a way forward without losing who we are. Sam's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity that had grown between them. And what about you? Have you found your way forward? Bird turned to him, her dark eyes meeting his gray ones directly. I think I have, she said softly. For years after Bear Creek, I lived for vengeance, for justice. Now, she glanced toward the farmhouse where Victoria was hanging laundry while Sarah played with children from Gray Wolf's band. Now I find myself living for something else. Sam's expression softened. Stay, he said simply. Not just until you're healed or until things are settled. Stay for good. Are you certain? Bird asked, though her hand tightened around his. There will be talk. Not everyone in town will accept. Let them talk, Sam replied. We've faced worse than gossip. Their conversation was interrupted by Victoria calling from the yard, waving them down to where Reverend Hayes had arrived with his wagon. The minister had become a frequent visitor, bringing news from town and supplies for the growing Apache settlement. As they walked down the hill together, Sam paused, turning to Bird with uncharacteristic hesitation. "There's something I've been meaning to ask," he began. Bird waited, her expression open and patient. "In Apache tradition," Sam continued carefully, "how does one ask for a woman's hand in marriage?" Bird's smile bloomed slowly, like the spring flowers dotting the hillside. "One begins," she replied, "by asking her heart if it is ready to join with his. The rest follows naturally." Sam took both her hands in his usual reserve giving way to naked emotion. "And is your heart ready?" singing Bird. "Despite our past, despite everything?" "Because of everything," she corrected gently. "Our paths crossed in shadow, but we found light together." Her smile deepened. "Yes, Samuel McAllister, my heart is ready." The wedding took place in May when wildflowers carpeted the valley in a riot of color. It was unlike any ceremony Oak Ridge had ever seen, a blend of traditions, with Reverend Hayes officiating alongside Grey Wolf, who conducted the Apache blessing rituals. Victoria stood proudly beside Bird, having insisted on helping her prepare for the ceremony. Sarah scattered flower petals with solemn dedication, taking her role as seriously as any sacred duty. Many from town attended, curiosity overcoming prejudice for most. Sam stood tall and straight, the shadow that had haunted him for so long finally lifting as he watched Bird approach in a dress that combined traditional Apache design with Western styling, Victoria's handiwork and gift to her soon-to-be stepmother. As vows were exchanged in both English and Apache, a sense of rightness settled over the gathering. Hayes spoke of bridges between peoples, of healing and new beginnings. Grey Wolf spoke of strength found in joining different rivers into one mighty stream. When it was done, when Sam and Bird were pronounced husband and wife under both their traditions, a cheer went up that echoed across the valley, not just from the wedding guests, but from the Apache settlement as well, where those too wary to attend celebrated from a distance. Later, as the celebration continued with food and music from both cultures, Sam and Bird slipped away briefly to the hilltop where he had proposed. The valley spread before them, Lone Pine Farm and the Apache settlement visible as one connected community. "Grandfather believed the land speaks to those who listen," Bird said, her hand in Sam's, "that it tells us where we belong." Sam nodded, understanding. "What does it tell you now?" Bird smiled, looking out over the valley that had seen so much pain and now, perhaps, could witness healing. "It says we are home, all of us." Above them, an eagle circled in the clear spring sky. In the farmhouse, someone had raised a flag. The stars and stripes of the American banner flew alongside a traditional Apache standard that Grey Wolf had created for their new beginning. "Land has no borders in truth," Bird observed, "only those we create." "And can uncreate," Sam added, his arms slipping around her waist. As they stood together, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains, the shadow of Bear Creek seemed to lift a little more. The past would always be there, the pain, the loss, the terrible mistakes, but it no longer defined their future. The land of wild hearts, once broken by conflict, was healing, and with it, the people who called it home.